What if I told you that 10 entire tribes of Israel vanished? Not in a myth, not in a parable, but in recorded history. One moment they were living, breathing nations, thousands of families, fields, warriors, priests, and the next they dissolved into silence, gone, swallowed by time. But here's the terrifying truth: they may not be gone at all. Whispers of their bloodline echo from the mountains of Ethiopia, through the deserts of Afghanistan, across the rivers of India, and even in the heart of Africa. Some say they still walk among us, hidden in plain sight. Others insist their return will mark the beginning of the end, the final chapter of human history foretold in ancient prophecy. For 3,000 years, the fate of these lost tribes has been called one of the greatest mysteries of the Bible. Were they destroyed, erased by conquest and exile, or have they been preserved, scattered like embers across the earth, waiting for the breath of God to reignite them? And if they are truly returning, what does that mean for us today? Is their reappearance a coincidence of culture or the ticking of a prophetic clock counting down to the Messiah's reign? Tonight we will journey into the shadows of history. We will follow the trail of Jacob's sons, the 12 tribes, and uncover how 10 of them disappeared, why their descendants may still be alive, and what role they could play in the prophecies of the end times. This is Grace and Word, where hidden history meets prophecy unfolding before our eyes. Now, let us begin where all mysteries begin. Chapter 1: The Birth of the Tribes. Long before the mysteries of the lost tribes, there was a man, a restless wanderer named Jacob. He was the grandson of Abraham, the one through whom God had sworn to bless all nations. Jacob's life was marked by struggle, deception, and relentless pursuit. But one night, everything changed. On the banks of the Jabbok River, Jacob wrestled with a mysterious figure until dawn. The scriptures tell us it was no ordinary man. It was an angel. Some believe it was God himself in visible form. All night Jacob fought, refusing to let go, desperate for a blessing. And at sunrise the angel struck his hip, leaving him crippled but also transformed. The angel spoke words that would echo across eternity. "Your name shall no longer be Jacob but Israel, for you have struggled with God and with men and have prevailed." That night the nation of Israel was born. But Israel was not just a man, it became a people. From Jacob's 12 sons emerged 12 tribes, each destined to carry a fragment of divine promise. They were not simply families, they were living prophecies, walking symbols of a covenant that reached beyond their own generation. Reuben, the firstborn bearer of dignity and strength. Simeon, fierce and divided. Levi, chosen for priesthood, guardians of the holy. Judah, the lion from whom kings and ultimately the Messiah would come. Dan, the judge. Naphtali, swift and free. Gad, the warrior tribe. Asher, blessed with abundance. Issachar, the strong donkey, laboring with wisdom. Zebulun, dwelling by the sea, traders of nations. Joseph, the dreamer, whose double portion extended through his sons Ephraim and Manasseh. And Benjamin, the youngest, beloved yet fierce. 12 names, 12 destinies, 12 tribes that together formed the nation of Israel. Each name was a prophecy, a foreshadowing of the roles they would play in history and in the unfolding story of redemption. Joseph did not have a single tribe. Instead, his 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, were each given a share of inheritance. Joseph's blessing was doubled, ensuring that his line would echo with unusual strength. This expansion created a paradox: 12 tribes, yet 13 names depending on how they were counted. It was as if God was leaving room for mystery, for a hidden design that only prophecy could explain. Together, these tribes were allotted portions of the Promised Land. Judah in the south by Jerusalem's hills, Ephraim and Manasseh commanding the central mountains, Zebulun by the coast, Asher in the fertile north. Each tribe had a place, a purpose, a role in the divine puzzle. They were like 12 stones in a crown, glittering with promise. But the crown would not remain unbroken. The blessings of Jacob in Genesis 49 foretold both greatness and fracture. Judah would rise as kingly, But Reuben would lose his birthright. Levi would scatter. Dan would strike like a serpent. Ephraim would become mighty yet restless. These prophecies whispered of tension of tribes destined not only to shine but also to clash, bound by the covenant yet threatened by human weakness. The very people chosen by God to enlighten the nations must constantly struggle, as their ancestors did, between obedience and rebellion. What God creates as one history often tears apart. The tribes at first lived in fragile harmony. They marched together through the wilderness under Moses. They crossed the Jordan under Joshua. They sang victory songs when Jericho's walls fell. Yet beneath the surface, pride, rivalry, and envy simmered. Ephraim envied Judah. Dan drifted. Reuben faltered. Division was waiting like a storm gathering at the horizon. For a moment in history under David and Solomon, the tribes stood united as one kingdom, a golden age of power, wisdom, and glory. But prophecy had already spoken. The harmony was never meant to last forever. The 12 tribes, once burning with divine promise, would soon be scattered like sparks into the night. These were not just families. They were living prophecies. Each tribe a symbol, each destiny a shadow of what was to come. But prophecy is never silent. It foretold not only their rise, but their fall. And so as we turn the page from their birth to their destiny, we must ask, how does a chosen people bound by covenant fall apart because unity never lasts forever? Prophecy had already spoken of division. Chapter 2. A kingdom torn apart. At the height of Israel's story, it seemed as if nothing could break them. Under King David, the 12 tribes were united like never before. David the shepherd who became king forged a kingdom that stretched from the deserts of Edom to the gates of Damascus. He conquered enemies, established Jerusalem as the capital, and brought the Ark of the Covenant into the city, making it not only the political center, but the spiritual heartbeat of the nation. For a brief moment in time, the covenant people stood as a shining light, a kingdom set apart by God. Then came Solomon, David's son. His reign glittered with wisdom and splendor. Foreign rulers traveled across continents to marvel at his wealth. The Queen of Sheba herself brought gold and spices, astonished by his wisdom. Under Solomon's hand, Israel became a superpower. The temple of the Lord in Jerusalem gleamed with gold, cedar, and jewels, a symbol that God himself dwelt among his people. This was the golden age, the mountaintop of Israel's history. But golden ages rarely last, and sometimes prosperity carries within it the seeds of downfall. In Solomon's later years, cracks began to appear. Though he was gifted with divine wisdom, his heart grew divided. The scriptures tell us he loved many foreign wives, and with them came foreign gods. High places of worship to idols rose in the land, creeping shadows into a kingdom built on light. The covenant people who were called to be holy began to fracture, not with swords at first, but with divided hearts. And then, after Solomon's death, the United Kingdom split in two. The northern kingdom, made up of 10 tribes, broke away, calling themselves simply Israel. The southern kingdom, smaller but holding Jerusalem, was known as Judah, composed mainly of the tribes of Judah and Benjamin. The prophets cried out warnings. Hosea compared the nation to an unfaithful spouse running after other lovers instead of the God who had chosen them. Amos thundered against their injustices, warning of judgment if they refused to return to covenant faithfulness. But the northern tribes did not listen. They prospered for a season, but their prosperity was poisoned. Idol worship spread. The covenant law was neglected. Justice vanished from the courts. And like a dark storm gathering on the horizon, judgment drew near. The year was 722 BC. The Assyrian Empire, ruthless and unstoppable, swept down upon the northern kingdom. Their armies were infamous for cruelty. Entire villages burned, cities were besieged, and when Samaria, the capital of Israel, finally fell, the 10 tribes were led away in chains, families torn apart, children separated from parents, the land emptied of its people. The Bible records it in chilling simplicity. In the 9th year of Hoshea, the king of Assyria captured Samaria and deported the Israelites to Assyria. He settled them in Hala in Gozan on the Habor River and in the towns of the Medes. 2 Kings 17:6. With that single moment, 10 tribes, Reuben, Simeon, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Zebulun, Ephraim, and Manasseh, vanished from the record of history. No returning caravans, no chronicles of their descendants. Silence. In one generation, 10 tribes disappeared from history. But does disappearance mean extinction? That is the haunting question. Assyria scattered them across its empire, resettling them in foreign lands, mixing them with other peoples. Some may have vanished into new cultures, their names erased. Others may have clung to fragments of their faith, whispers of their past. Were they gone forever or simply hidden? Hosea, even while declaring judgment, spoke of restoration. Yet the Israelites will be like the sand on the seashore, which cannot be measured or counted. In the place where it was said to them, "You are not my people," they will be called children of the living God. Hosea 1:10. Perhaps exile was not the end, but the scattering of seeds. Perhaps what was lost to history was never lost to God. Because disappearance does not mean extinction, it means dispersion. If the 10 tribes were scattered, where did they go? What nations might carry their blood, their customs, their memory, even if buried beneath centuries of silence? The trail of the lost tribes does not end in Assyria. In fact, that's where it begins. Chapter 3. Whispers Across the World. If 10 tribes vanished, where did they go? That question has haunted historians, rabbis, and theologians for over 2,000 years. The Assyrian conquest scattered the people across an empire that stretched from Mesopotamia to the mountains of Persia. But empires crumble and records fade. The northern tribes were never heard from again, or at least that's what history books would tell us. But silence is never empty. Sometimes silence hides whispers. A child taken from Samaria grows up speaking a foreign tongue in Assyria. A family resettled near the river Habor adopts new customs, yet still whispers the Shema at night. Over generations, languages change, faces blend, but traces remain, tiny threads of identity woven into nations. Isaiah spoke of the exiles of Israel returning from Assyria, from Egypt, from Cush, from Elam, from Shinar, from Hamath, and from the islands of the sea. Isaiah 11:11. That verse suggests dispersion far beyond one land, stretching across continents. For centuries, Jewish tradition carried a belief the 10 tribes were never destroyed, only hidden. Some rabbis claimed they lived beyond the mysterious river Sambatyon, roaring 6 days a week and resting only on the Sabbath, forever cutting them off from the rest of the world. Others speculated they journeyed eastward into Asia. Still others believed they wandered south into Africa. Wherever they went, their memory refused to die. Across the world, communities rose with uncanny echoes of Israel. They carried strange customs, circumcision, dietary restrictions, Sabbath observance that mirrored ancient Hebrew law, even though they had been isolated for centuries. Could it be coincidence? Or were these fragments of a shattered kingdom resurfacing through time? In Ethiopia, a community known as Beta Israel preserved rituals nearly identical to Mosaic law. In India, a people called the Bene Israel claimed descent from shipwrecked Israelites. In Afghanistan, entire tribes called themselves Bani Israel, children of Israel. In the jungles of Nigeria, the Igbo people practiced rites strikingly similar to Judaism. And in southern Africa, the Lemba carried oral traditions of being priests from Jerusalem, and modern DNA would later confirm a startling connection. The whispers grow louder the closer we listen. For example, when European explorers reached Ethiopia, they were astonished to find black-skinned Jews keeping the Sabbath, practicing circumcision, and reading Torah scrolls. These people insisted they descended from the tribe of Dan. How could a Jewish community have survived in the highlands of Africa, isolated for millennia, unless they carried with them the memory of exile? or consider the Bene Israel of India. For centuries, they lived apart, eating no pork, circumcising their sons on the 8th day, reciting Hebrew prayers they themselves no longer understood. Their story begins with shipwreck ancestors cast upon the Konkan coast, perhaps survivors of the Assyrian deportations, lost to mainstream Judaism, yet never entirely lost. Then there are the Pashtuns of Afghanistan and Pakistan. Fierce, tribal, and warlike, they have long referred to themselves as Bani Israel. Many of their clans bear names that echo Israelite tribes. They practice circumcision, forbid pork, and preserve traditions eerily familiar to Mosaic law. Could tens of millions of Muslims today be descended from Ephraim and Manasseh? And what of the Igbo of Nigeria? They tell stories of coming from Israel, of carrying an ark, of keeping ancient feasts. Their customs align too closely to dismiss. And among the Lemba of Zimbabwe and South Africa, genetic testing has revealed the Cohen modal haplotype, a genetic marker linked to the priestly line of Aaron. If true, that would mean descendants of Israel's priesthood walk the valleys of Africa to this very day. Each of these groups is like a ghost of the past, a living echo of tribes scattered long ago. Alone, each claim might be dismissed as legend. Together, they form a pattern too provocative to ignore. The disappearance of the 10 tribes was not the end. It was the beginning of a mystery that stretches across continents, across cultures, across centuries. What if the lost tribes were never lost? What if they became part of the nations, embedded like hidden seeds, only now beginning to re-emerge? Their whispers are not whispers anymore. They are voices calling for recognition, voices carrying fragments of a forgotten inheritance. And those voices demand investigation. Because if they are who they claim to be, then the world is not merely looking at isolated ethnic groups. We are witnessing the unraveling of prophecy, the regathering of Israel from the four corners of the earth. And this leads us into the next chapter of our journey, where whispers turn into testimonies and testimonies into shocking evidence. For the mystery of the lost tribes is no longer confined to ancient scrolls. It is alive in the people of today. Chapter 4. Ethiopia. The tribe of Dan high in the rugged mountains of Ethiopia, far from Jerusalem's walls and far from the familiar landscapes of the Bible, lived a people whose very existence puzzled explorers, missionaries, and scholars alike. They called themselves Beta Israel, the House of Israel. For centuries they survived in isolation, surrounded by nations that did not share their ways, clinging to customs that mirrored ancient Mosaic law. The world looked at them with disbelief. Black-skinned Jews in the highlands of Africa. How could this be? And yet there they were, guarding rituals long forgotten by many, holding fast to an identity no one thought possible. They kept the Sabbath, refusing to work on the 7th day, even when it cost them dearly in trade and survival. They practiced circumcision on the 8th day, just as commanded in the Torah. They refrained from eating pork and followed dietary laws that echoed those of Leviticus. They celebrated Passover with unleavened bread. And they read from scrolls written not in modern Hebrew, but in Ge'ez, an ancient Semitic language that carried echoes of the past. These were not borrowed customs. They were inherited traditions, practices preserved like embers in the ashes of history. For centuries they lived cut off from the broader Jewish world. No rabbis from Jerusalem guided them. No contact with the great centers of Jewish scholarship in Babylon or Europe sustained them. They endured persecution, poverty, and marginalization in Ethiopia. And yet through it all they held on to their claim, "We are Israel. We descend from the lost tribe of Dan." Some traditions say they came to Ethiopia through Egypt during the days of exile, settling in the highlands where they built villages and synagogues in secrecy. Others connect them to the Queen of Sheba's visit to Solomon, suggesting ancient ties between Ethiopia and Israel. Whatever the route, their identity became fixed. They were a forgotten branch of the family of Jacob, living at the edge of the world. For centuries, the wider Jewish world doubted them. But that changed in the late 20th century. As Ethiopia faced famine, civil war, and instability, international attention turned to the Beta Israel. Stories began to surface of their desire to return back to the land of their ancestors, back to Israel. In 1984, a covert operation known as Operation Moses began. Over the course of weeks, thousands of Ethiopian Jews were secretly transported out of refugee camps in Sudan, airlifted to Israel. Emaciated, starving but alive, they stepped onto the soil of the Promised Land for the first time in generations. The world watched in astonishment. It was as though the pages of Isaiah had come alive. He will gather the exiles of Israel from the four corners of the earth. In 1991, during Ethiopia's political collapse, Israel launched Operation Solomon. In just 36 hours, more than 14,000 Ethiopian Jews were flown to Israel in an unprecedented airlift. So many people were packed into the planes that one aircraft carried over 1,000 passengers, setting a world record. Babies were even born mid-flight, delivered in the sky as the people of Dan returned home. For the first time in history, the world saw a prophecy echoed in airplane wings. It was not merely a rescue mission. It was a symbol, a living testament that God's promises never die. A people forgotten by history, hidden in the highlands, were suddenly brought back to the land of their fathers. The dispersion of 722 BC had reached across millennia, only to bend back toward fulfillment in the modern age. Skeptics debated their origins. Were they truly from the tribe of Dan, or were they simply a community that adopted Jewish customs? But to many, the question mattered less than the miracle of their survival and return. Their journey was an unmistakable echo of prophecy, proof that the lost tribes were not myth, but reality waiting to be revealed. The story of Beta Israel reminds us that God's covenant threads may be scattered, but they are never broken. Like sparks hidden in ash, they flare to life when the wind of history stirs them. And Ethiopia was only the beginning. Because the whispers of Israel's lost children are not confined to Africa alone. They stretch further across seas into lands once thought unreachable. Our journey now turns eastward to the coasts of India, where another community far from Jerusalem claims descent from the tribes of Israel. And their story is just as mysterious. Chapter 5. India and Afghanistan. Shipwrecks and warriors. Far from the hills of Jerusalem and the deserts of Samaria, the story of the lost tribes takes an unexpected turn into the vast subcontinent of India. For here along the Konkan coast, whispers of Israel surfaced in the form of a small, mysterious community known as the Bene Israel. Oral tradition tells of a shipwreck ancestors sailing from the Middle East, perhaps during the Assyrian exile, cast into the unforgiving waters of the Indian Ocean. The sea swallowed most of them, but a handful survived, washing ashore along the western coast of India. Stranded in a foreign land, surrounded by unfamiliar languages and gods, they clung to fragments of their identity. Generations passed. Cut off from Jerusalem, forgotten by the larger Jewish world, the Bene Israel preserved what they could. They circumcised their sons on the 8th day. They refused to eat unclean foods, especially pork. They observed the Sabbath, resting on the 7th day, even when their neighbors did not understand. Over time, they blended into Indian culture, adopting dress language and even occupations common to their region. Yet beneath the surface, they remained different guardians of an identity their hosts could never fully erase. For centuries, they lived in obscurity, an island of Israelite memory in the Sea of India. When Jewish travelers and later European explorers encountered them, they were astonished. How could this community, isolated for so long, maintain traditions so distinctly tied to ancient Israel? The Bene Israel themselves insisted on their descent from the tribe of Ephraim. Though they had lost Hebrew fluency and many ritual practices, their oral memory never died. They knew they were children of Jacob. Jewish leaders began to accept them as part of the broader family of Israel. Some emigrated to the land of their ancestors, joining the modern state of Israel. Their story stands as a testament to survival, not of armies or kingdoms, but of memory carried across centuries of silence. But if the Bene Israel reveal Israel's survival through shipwreck, the story of Afghanistan and Pakistan's Pashtun people reveals survival through warriors. The Pashtuns, numbering in the tens of millions, are one of the largest tribal groups in the world. They are known for their fierce independence, their tribal codes of honor, and their resistance to foreign empires. Yet among themselves, many Pashtuns carry a startling claim: they are Bani Israel, children of Israel. The echoes are uncanny. Pashtun oral tradition tells of ancestors who came from the land of Israel scattered during the Assyrian exile. Their tribal names often bear striking similarities to the names of Israelite tribes. They practice circumcision on the 8th day, in line with the command given to Abraham and his descendants. They forbid the eating of pork, a dietary law shared with Jews but unusual in the region's pre-Islamic cultures. Even their tribal structure bears resemblance to the clan-based organization of ancient Israel. For centuries, these customs have fueled speculation that the Pashtuns may indeed be remnants of the lost tribes, particularly Ephraim and Manasseh, the sons of Joseph, whose inheritance made them pillars of the northern kingdom. Some argue that these parallels arose from Islamic influence or cultural borrowing, but the persistence of these traditions and the Pashtuns' own insistence on their Israelite heritage refuses to be ignored. Tens of millions of Pashtuns may trace their bloodlines back to the House of Israel. If true, that would mean one of the largest Muslim populations on earth secretly carries the blood of Ephraim and Manasseh, the very tribes that once stood at the heart of the northern kingdom before its fall. Could it be that a nation known today for its warrior culture, for resisting empires from Alexander the Great to modern superpowers, is in fact a living remnant of the people scattered by Assyria? Could prophecy be hiding in plain sight among the mountains of Afghanistan and Pakistan? It blurs the lines between faiths, cultures, and nations, and it forces us to ask if God scattered his people among the nations. Then, is it so impossible that Israel's blood flows in places we least expect? From the Ben. Israel washed ashore in India to the Pashtun tribes in Afghanistan's mountains. The lost tribes appear not as myth, but as mystery woven into the living fabric of nations. Their survival defies logic, yet echoes the promise that Israel would never be erased. And they are not alone. Because as the trail continues, we will find that echoes of the tribes surface not only in Asia, but deep within the heart of Africa, among people whose customs, stories, and even DNA carry fragments of a forgotten covenant. Chapter 6. Africa's Hidden Tribes. The whispers of the lost tribes are not confined to the Middle East or Asia. They echo too in the heart of Africa, a land far from ancient Samaria, yet filled with customs and stories that sound strangely familiar. Among the rolling hills of Nigeria lives a people known as the Igbo. Numbering in the tens of millions, they are one of Africa's most vibrant ethnic groups. But behind their colorful culture and history lies a startling claim: we are Israelites. For generations, many Igbo have believed that they descend from the tribes of Gad and Zebulun. Their traditions, carried quietly through the centuries, bear striking resemblance to the ancient customs of Israel. They practice circumcision on the 8th day, just as Abraham was commanded. They refrain from eating unclean animals. Some Igbo communities historically observe their own form of Sabbath rest, and their festivals, though blended with local culture, carry echoes of biblical feasts. Even their oral history tells of ancestors who migrated from the Middle East, scattered long ago, and settled in the forests and rivers of West Africa. Missionaries arriving in Nigeria in the 19th century were astonished to find communities who instinctively identified with stories of the Old Testament, who claimed not just spiritual kinship, but actual descent. Scholars argue whether these customs were remnants of ancient Israelite memory or simply cultural parallels. Yet the sheer persistence of their belief, passed down through centuries of colonization, conversion, and upheaval, cannot be dismissed so easily. And in recent years, many Igbo have embraced Judaism, openly building synagogues, studying Hebrew, and seeking connection with Israel. It is as if the lost tribes, long silent, are beginning to stir once more in the heart of Africa. Travel further south into Zimbabwe and South Africa, and you will find another community whose story is even more astonishing: the Lemba. The Lemba people carry an oral tradition that they are descendants of ancient Israelites who migrated from the Middle East generations ago. Their customs are deeply unusual compared to their African neighbors. They practice circumcision. They observe dietary restrictions, avoiding pork and slaughtering animals in ways that resemble kosher laws. They maintain clan structures that echo priestly divisions. They even revere a sacred object they call the Ngoma Lungundu, a wooden drum some describe as a replica of the biblical Ark of the Covenant. For centuries, outsiders dismissed the Lemba's claims as myth. But then came science. In the late 20th century, genetic studies were conducted on the Lemba. What researchers discovered sent shockwaves through the scholarly world. A significant number of Lemba men, particularly from the priestly Buba clan, carried a genetic marker known as the Cohen modal haplotype. This marker is strongly associated with the Jewish priesthood, tracing back to Aaron, the brother of Moses. Simply put, science today has confirmed what oral tradition has preserved for centuries. Descendants of the Levi priestly tribe may still be living in the hills of southern Africa. Even in forgotten corners of Africa, the priestly tribe still breathes. It means that the scattering of the tribes was not a death sentence, but a dispersion with divine purpose. That God's covenant threads, though stretched across continents, still pulse with life. From the Igbo of Nigeria to the Lemba of Zimbabwe and South Africa, the ancient identity of Israel refuses to die. Skeptics call it coincidence. Believers see it as prophecy in motion. But one fact is undeniable: scattered communities across Africa, separated by geography and centuries, carry fragments of the same story. And when those fragments are pieced together, they form a picture that is hard to ignore. The lost tribes may not be as lost as we once thought. Their bloodlines, their customs, their memories, hidden like seeds in the soil of Africa, are beginning to surface. And this leads us to the most important question of all. If these tribes are resurfacing, if their stories are aligning with Scripture, then what does it mean for prophecy? Because the Bible never spoke of their disappearance as the end, it spoke of their return. And the return of the lost tribes is not simply history rediscovered, it is prophecy fulfilled. Chapter 7: Prophecy of Return. The story of the lost tribes does not end with silence. It bends toward prophecy. Because the Bible never spoke of them as erased, it spoke of them as scattered, and what is scattered can be gathered again. Centuries after the Assyrian exile, the prophet Ezekiel was given a vision unlike any other. He was carried by the Spirit into a valley filled with bones, dry, lifeless, scattered across the ground. To Ezekiel, it was a scene of utter hopelessness. But God asked him, "Son of man, can these bones live?" Ezekiel hesitated. "Sovereign Lord, you alone know." And then came the command, "Prophesy to these bones and say to them, dry bones, hear the word of the Lord. I will make breath enter you, and you will come to life." Ezekiel spoke, and suddenly the bones began to rattle. They joined together, bone to bone. Flesh covered them. Breath filled them, and an army rose from the dust of death. God declared, "These bones are the people of Israel. I will open your graves and bring you back to the land of Israel. I will make them one nation in the land on the mountains of Israel. There will be one king over all of them, and they will never again be two nations or be divided into two kingdoms. The words thunder across time, I will make them one nation in the land." This vision was not about the past, it was about the future, about the scattered tribes being restored, united once more, not just Judah, not just Benjamin, but the whole house of Israel. Isaiah echoed the same promise. He will raise a banner for the nations and gather the exiles of Israel. He will assemble the scattered people of Judah from the four corners of the earth. Isaiah 11:12. Notice it is not only Judah. It is the exiles, the lost ones, the fragments spread from Africa to Asia, from the Middle East to the islands of the sea. God's promise is global. His regathering spans continents. And in the New Testament, the book of Revelation gives us one more glimpse. John, the beloved disciple, heard the number of those who would be sealed in the end. 144,000, 12,000 from every tribe of Israel. Revelation 7:4, 12 tribes. Not two, not Judah alone, all of them. That includes the so-called lost tribes, which means in the last days they are not lost at all. They are counted. They are sealed. They are part of God's final plan. Every whisper we have traced from Ethiopia to India, from Afghanistan to Nigeria, from Zimbabwe to South Africa, every claim, every tradition, every custom that seemed out of place may in fact be puzzle pieces of a greater design. A design foretold by prophets thousands of years ago. The lost tribes are not just history, they are destiny. Their disappearance was never their end. It was their preparation. Their scattering was not abandonment. It was a scattering of seeds meant to be gathered in a final harvest at the end of days. Their return is not merely about identity. It is about fulfillment, about the restoration of all Israel under one king, the Messiah. The regathering of Israel is inseparably tied to the Messianic age. Ezekiel says they will never again be divided. Isaiah says they will return from the four corners. Revelation declares they will stand sealed, protected as the Great Tribulation unfolds. So every plane carrying Ethiopian Jews, every Pashtun whispering Bani Israel, every Igbo family telling stories of ancient Israel, every Lemba priest holding their sacred traditions, they are all signs. Signs that the prophetic clock is ticking. Signs that what God promised is unfolding before our eyes. And if the tribes are returning, then the next chapter of prophecy cannot be far behind. Because the question is no longer if the tribes exist. The question is what happens when they are fully revealed. The return of the tribes is not just about the past being recovered, it is about the future being written. And in that future, every one of us has a part to play. The story of the lost tribes is not just about history or prophecy, it is about us. We live in a world where families are divided, cultures scattered, and faith often feels forgotten. Yet the promise of God remains: what is scattered can be gathered, what seems lifeless can be restored, and what feels forgotten is never truly lost. The longer we live, the heavier our memories become. Loved ones leave us, traditions fade away, and the world changes so quickly. The tribes remind us that even when identity feels blurred, God never forgets his people. Not then, not now, not ever. The bones in Ezekiel's valley rose because God breathed on them. And so too our weary spirits can rise when his breath enters again. You may feel that parts of your life have been broken, that time has scattered your strength. But dispersion is not destruction, it is preparation. So take heart. The same God who gathers Israel from the ends of the earth is the one who gathers your tears, your prayers, your years. Nothing is wasted. You are not forgotten. And the best chapters of his promise are still ahead.